Hi, I'm Bill Hilton, here to talk about making drawers. The dovetail is traditional for assembling drawers. The problem with it is, it's time-consuming to cut and fit. So how about a French dovetail? It's nothing more than a sliding dovetail, which has all the strength of a dovetail joint without the overhead of setting up a jig and clamping each piece into the jig and making the cut and then unclamping it and putting a new piece in the jig. With the French dovetail joint, all the cuts are made on the router table and basically with one setup. Let's take a look at a drawer. It has sliding dovetails joining the back to the sides as well as the sides to the front. The bottom passes under the back and rides in grooves in the sides and front. Each dovetail slot in the drawer front has to be inset about a ½ inch so its shoulder has enough meat to resist splitting out. If you need to provide space for drawer slides, you've got it. Use the same offset in cutting the slots for the back. Fit a ½ inch dovetail bit in the router table router. This bit will work whether the drawer sides are 3/4 inch stock or ½ inch stock or anything in between. It's the most common size of dovetail bit too, being the size any router bit set includes. Adjust the cut depth to 1/4 inch. Set the fence so the slot's center line will be 3/4 inch from the end of the drawer front. Test it by slotting some scraps of the working stock. To cut the slots, butt the workpiece end against the fence, back it up with a pusher, and feed the work from right to left, cutting the slot. In this manner, you cut slots in the drawer front for the sides and in the drawer sides for the back. So I spin the drawer front and cut a slot in the other end of it. I use the same technique to cut a slot in each side. Once you have slotted all the fronts and sides, you reposition the router table fence to cut tails on the sides and the back. My approach is to move the fence over the bit so just the very top tip of the cutting edge is exposed. Stand a test piece on edge with a backup block behind it. Feed it through, turn it around, and cut across the second face. Check the fit of this tail in one of the slots. If it doesn't fit, readjust the fence and try again. Once you've got it, route tails on the sides and backs. The next step is to route grooves for the bottom and the drawer front and sides. I've got the router table set up with a 1/4 inch straight bit adjusted to make a 3/16 inch deep cut, centered 3/8 inch from the bottom edge of the parts. The cut is end to end in the sides. In the fronts, I groove from dovetail slot to dovetail slot. To avoid trouble, I position the front on the table with the bit in a slot before turning on the router. Cut until the change in the router's sound and the resistance to the cut says the second dovetail slot has been reached. Switch off the router, let it wind down, then look at the groove. Let's try a dry assembly. One side is already fitted to its slot in the drawer front. Let's fit the second. Then slide the bottom into its grooves. And last, capture the back and its slots in the sides and drive it into place, snug against the drawer bottom. All in all, this kind of dovetail drawer is pretty easy to construct and surely as strong a drawer as you can make. Before I let you get back to your own woodworking, there is one more approach that I'd like to show you. This drawer we just made has through dovetail slots in the front, which allow you to see the dovetail joint. but you may not necessarily want to have this joint exposed. This drawer, which I showed you at the outset of the video, the slot in the front is stopped so that it doesn't show at the top. And that would be useful if you just didn't want that joinery showing, or if you wanted to have the top of the drawer front proud of the sides. I'm going to show you how a good way to do that is safe and trouble-free. Here's the sliding fence I built for this router table. Perhaps what you noticed first is that it's at right angles to the conventional fence, and it moves. Sure, you can clamp it, but the point is to be able to move it. The assembly has two slides which hug the front and back edges of the tabletop. There's no play side to side, but the unit slides freely. The problem the sliding fence addresses is feed direction. With the regular fence on your router table, you can do the left end of each drawer feeding right to left as is proper. But to slot the front's right end, you either have to set the fence far from the cutter, which makes feed and cut very dicey, or you have to make a climb cut feeding from left to right, and that's equally dicey. The sliding fence allows you to make both cuts in the proper feed direction and without changing the basic setup. To govern the length of the cut, to prevent you from the inadvertent through cut, you clamp a stop to the tabletop to arrest the movement of the sliding table. What I've decided arbitrarily is I want it to be 3/4 of an inch, so I use these brass shims. One is 1/2 inch, one is 1/4 of an inch square. And I put those here and slide the fence up until it just touches the cutting edge of the router bit. Now I'm going to take a scrap of wood and place it so that it's against the strut. Clamp it to the top of the router table. Now I can cut to here and it will stop, and the cut will end 3/4 of an inch from the top edge of the workpiece. The key is the stop on the fence. You locate it to the right of the bit because the cutter wants to pull the work in that direction, and the stop resists that pull. Position the stop for the cut on the drawer's left end. With the front's right end against the stop, you advance the fence and make a cut near the front's left end. To reposition the workpiece for the second cut, you place a spacer between it and the stop. The length of the spacer matches the distance between the two cuts. Let me be clear that withdrawing the work from the cutter constitutes a climb cut. There is a bit of risk as you pull the fence and the workpiece back, so hold the work tight to the fence as you pull it back at the cut's end. So here we are, two stopped dovetail slots. The center line of each is 3/4 of an inch from the butt end of the workpiece. Each stops 3/4 of an inch from the top edge. You're all set to put the drawer together. This is a great system to use, especially with production work where you're making a whole stack of drawer fronts, a whole stack of drawer sides. You can set this up to do the fronts and then adjust it as necessary to do the sides, and then put the regular fence back on the router table without changing the bit at all, and cut the dovetails on the appropriate parts. It's easy when you know how.